Yeah, I would not. You don't like it? No?
I want you all to imagine that this glass of beer is sitting right in front of you. Now, many of you might look at it and not see anything but old beer. But let's try to think a little more metaphorically. For most of course, this glass of beer could represent a lot of 227 years of brewing excellence, global portfolio of quality beers, a household brand name that consumers demand. For today, let's assume that this glass of beer represents Molson Coors' global revenue in 2011. Now, on a whim, let's cut out sales in North America. Okay, let's go one step further and cut out sales from Europe. What we have left is backwash at the bottom of the glass. It represents sales from other countries around the world. So clearly Molson Coors is dependent on its North American and European markets. Is that really a bad thing? Let's take our beloved United States as an example. In the US, Anheuser-Busch holds 52% of the market. SABMiller holds 18%. Molson Coors holds 10%. 19% is split among various other groups. So what we see here is that there really isn't any room for Molson Coors, or any other group for that matter, to grow. Anheuser-Busch has such a commanding market that only 19% is available for other groups. This market saturation applies to all of North America and Europe, where old and established brewers have really been cementing their foothold over the years. So the question that arises from all this is how can Molson Coors expand outside of these stagnant markets? Our answer to that question is Incident, which translates to silver bullet. Incident is an American-style brew pub that we advise Molson Coors to launch in Beijing, China. Good afternoon, my name is Lenny Palmer. We are Team Molson Coors. Today we will walk you through why we picked China as our market for expansion, why we picked a brew pub as our means for expansion, and finally why we think Incident is so special.
I will be discussing why we selected China as the region for Molson Coors to expand into. First and foremost, the Chinese market is not very saturated. Tsingtao Brewing Company holds 13% of the market, SABMiller holds 16% of the market, and Anheuser-Busch has 11% of the market. That leaves 59% of the market, which is held by other brewers, including Molson Coors. This means that Molson Coors does not necessarily need to increase their market share by a lot in order to combat its competitors. The second reason we selected China is because it is the fastest growing beer market in the world. In 2006, the beer market was worth $37.9 billion. That grew to $58.5 billion in 2010, and is expected to reach $70 billion in 2014. That's a lot of beer. Now, Molson Coors already does have a presence in China. Coors Light is distributed amongst 40 different cities, and this was helped by Molson Coors purchasing 51% controlling share and forming a joint venture with Haibei Shanghai Brewing Company, a Chinese company located in Shenzhen, the northern province of China. This joint venture is an important resource for Molson Coors, as Haibei Shanghai has connections with the local governments and bureaucracies. Governments obviously decide who buys land and what tax exemptions companies get, so this is an important step for Molson.
So Michelle covered why we chose China as our market for expansion, and I'm going to go over why we chose a brew pub as our means of expansion. Now, before we get into why a brew pub, let's just first cover what a brew pub is. Simply, a brew pub is a bar that makes and sells its own beer. It makes less than 15,000 barrels of beer a year, and more than that, it's considered a larger brewery. It sells at least 25% of its beer on site. Any more is considered a microbrewery, or any less is considered a microbrewery. Now, this is a picture of a typical brew pub, and as you can see in the back are the vats where the brew is beer on site. Now, the beer brewed in a brew pub is very different from Coors Light or Bud Light. It focuses more on creating depth and distinction with certain traditional flavors that consumers are actually willing to pay more for. Now, in the US, in 2008, the craft beer market was worth $2.8 billion. That number grew to $7.6 billion in 2011. But what does this matter for China? As it turns out, this is a trend occurring in China as well. According to an article by Forbes magazine, the number of brew pubs in China has doubled in the past 2 years. And according to reports by these brew pubs, Chinese consumers are taking with the new brews that they are creating and are really open to this idea. Oh, okay. So while this is a growing trend in China, it's not something that any large brewery has gotten in on the ground floor of. It's open to Molson Coors. If Molson Coors can get in on the ground floor of this growing trend, they can become known in consumers' minds like no other beer is known.
So now that we've discussed the viability of the Chinese market and shown why we've chosen a brew pub for expansion, I'm going to describe why the Sedan is so special. The Sedan will be located in Beijing, China, due to the growing nightlife in the city and its proximity to Shanghai, where Haidian Shanghai, the joint venture that we discussed, is located. We believe it's important to locate near this joint venture as it will help us deal with bureaucracies and get the brew pub up and running. In terms of the physical bar, we'll feature wall-to-wall bars and a brick facade. By the way, it's pretty cool. I should let you know. So we'll feature wall-to-wall bars and a brick facade. There will be exposed brewing equipment in the back available for daily tours. And there will be a stage big enough for some big names, but small enough for the Chinese pastime and carry. So you guys are probably thinking to yourselves that you've probably been to a place very similar to this, and that's kind of exactly what we're going for. We wanted to build a traditional American style food. We did research that showed that Chinese consumers are willing to pay more for American products. So we believe that providing them American style will be the answer. But we will keep some of the aspects of the bar uniquely Chinese. One of these aspects is the signature brew of the bar. As we said, we'll be making and selling our own beer. So instead of using hops, we'll be using rice, and instead of barley, reverse. Instead of barley, we'll be using rice. Instead of hops, we'll be using bitter melon as a bitter origin. We believe that these traditional flavors will attract a lot of Chinese consumers. We will also feature Molson Coors' global portfolio of beers, including Blue Moon, Carling, Heineken, Corona, and other beers that you've definitely heard of. We want to go after the young market in Beijing. Recently, more and more nightclubs and bars have been popping up all over the city, and attendance is through the roof. We believe that going after the young consumers is very important. In this market, the average consumer can't tell the difference between a Coors Light, a Bud Light, and a Miller Light, and in case each of these beers costs exactly the same. So the only way the brewers capture loyalty is with the blind consumer loyalty, which can only be captured at a very young age. We believe it's important to get young consumers into Instagram, get them drinking Molson Coors brands, and make them associate those brands with them and believe over time. That way we can capture consumer loyalty at a very young age. If the Sedan is successful, it can become a franchise opportunity and be opened in cities across China and the world.
So Andrew covered with you what Sedan is all about, and I'm going to go over our implementation plan. Now, the important thing about this implementation plan is it can be replicated in growing cities across the world if Sedan proves to be successful in China. Now, we plan for this to take between 15 and 18 months. We want to get this in and started as soon as possible before any other brewery takes this over. Now, the first step in this process is also the most important. It's the acquisition of a building. Molson Coors needs to make sure that they acquire a building in a great part of downtown Beijing, but it also has a layout that's open to any design changes they'd like to make. Now, after the building has been acquired, they can then move on to redesign and reconstruction, as well as to creating the signature brew that will be brewed on site. After both of those have moved forward, we can then move on to the hiring process. The most important step in the hiring process is the hiring of a bar manager. Molson Coors needs to make sure that they hire a manager that has not only worked in a brew pub before, but has also worked in the Chinese market. After that has occurred, they can then move on to hiring other employees for the bar, and then they can move on to marketing and promotion once a grand opening date has been set. And then the grand opening date arrives, and it's an amazing experience for everyone who attends.
To summarize, our team has defined Molson Coors' greatest challenge as overcoming their dependence on the North American and European beer markets for revenue, both of which are saturated and would offer the company little room to grow. Therefore, we recommend that Molson Coors focus their efforts in China because of two main characteristics. One, it is the fastest growing beer market in the world, and two, the high population offers a wide variety of customers for Molson Coors to appeal to. We recommend the establishment of a brew pub because of the increased trends in nightlife and microbreweries, global brand awareness?
I think we can all agree that a truly global presence is the key to success of any multinational company. I think we can also agree that sticking to stagnant markets is not the way to achieve this level of international brand awareness. If most Fordham adopts our concept of Inside, we believe it will be the company's first step to tackling markets outside of North America and Europe. Sales from these other countries will no longer be backwash of lots of lives. In fact, we're going to be good.
Any last questions you have for these people before they have to leave us about the presentation?
Do you mean us specifically, or do you mean?
One of them was about, it actually wasn't even a professional who asked it, it was a professor, and they asked if...
And oh yes, we will ask you questions during or after the presentation, during the regular competition and final round.
They actually asked if our numbers were specific for China's brewery, so like expanding the Chinese market, and the numbers like 15% group on site, or 50,000 group on site, and 25% sold on site for Chinese numbers, and we had no idea what they were. So I think I answered it saying that since it's a U.S. style brew pub, that we're using U.S. numbers.
Yeah, I think you should all realize that your professors and the judges are going to be paying really close attention. So don't throw numbers up there that you're not ready to explain in detail. Because they're gonna ask, are they up there doing the industry for so long? So if you're putting something up there, make sure you can explain it.
And you'll learn strategies for managing these things. Very quickly, I see two questions, but really that's all the time we have, because I want to make sure you have time to use your team and understand the little more. After that?
We mostly focus on PowerPoint, which is what most people use. For the drawings and stuff, we didn't use Photoshop.
It was all Michelle.
Michelle drew everything in this PowerPoint in case you were wondering. She just doesn't want to take credit. Yes, there was a written report. There is with the first time you do it in December. Yeah, the very first time you do it with your cohort, you turn in a 20-page paper with it, which sounds terrifying, but it's actually really not as bad as it seems.
We're working on it all semester, and keep in mind you have written report on the people who are running with you, so it's not an issue.
So you're going to see these folks on campus. One, I want you to come up to them and tell them they did a great job using them on campus. And two, if you have any questions, you'll be happy to answer them, right? You have appreciation for this group, thank you so much. So there are a couple things that we need to talk about. Really start with this process. And we're moving on to the final item on our agenda, and that's the next steps. You'll notice that these next steps are listed on the sheet that you see when you came today, you see the assignment and the project assignment. So you see a series of individual deliverables. All of the individual deliverables are already posted, should be posted on the universe. So you want to update your profile on the universe, because here will be able to see that, and faculty will be able to see that. You also have a screenshot. Again, because it's visible to your peers and us, we make sure it's professional. So you want to complete the individual expectations worksheet, and you have two online quizzes. You also, as a team, and we're going to discuss this in every your teams, you need to go on sort of a photo scattering. This is a great way to bring guests. You've heard all of your peers who have gone through this program to say, meet your team and become friends. Because you're going to be working with each other the entire semester. And sometimes it's going to be challenging. And it's best to become a strong personal connection with your colleagues in order to work together. So you need to submit, one person from the team needs to submit a team pic in front of any sort of icon. That's originally ridiculous as long as it's icon, team pic would be icon. A team pic in your favorite space that you call, and a team pic about fun activities. Strategically about fun activities. Because this will really get you on the road, guys, and develop strong personal and interpersonal relationships. So those are the deliverables. You notice that there are sheets hanging around the room. You want to find your section number, and you'll notice that the people with your section number share the same color of sheet as you do, because that will help you find your teammates. So those are the